Brother Mandela, Brother Nelson Mandela, Mrs. Winnie Mandela, we very warmly welcome you, as you can easily tell, to the House of American Labor. For more than 3 decades, the American working people, through their trade unions, have been doing their best to support you and your brothers and sisters in South Africa in their struggle for human justice to build a free and democratic, non-racial, and just society. And we pledge to you that we will persist in that struggle until victory is achieved, until apartheid is ended and a true, free, and democratic and just society is established. We intend to persist in our support for the sanctions that are needed to bring the necessary pressures to bear and to continue those pressures, and we will not support the removal of those sanctions until a free and just society is established. We will support, as we have for years, these sanctions. We'll support their strengthening until apartheid joins segregation in the dustbin of history, and until you and your comrades who have struggled for so long and with such unflinching courage and endurance take your rightful place in the leadership of a truly just and democratic and humane society. It is an honor for us, and we deeply value your coming to this building, to your brothers and sisters of the American trade union movement, to enable us to share with you this, what you represent, the triumph of the human spirit. Brother Mandela.
Mr. President, our brothers and sisters, I have in our delegation the Vice President of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. Mr. Chris Dlamini, and little I will call upon him just now to respond to the warm remarks made by our colleague here. It is sufficient for me to say that we regard it as an honor for us to be welcomed by the labor movement of the United States of America, which has an established record of commitment to the struggle by the people of South Africa against apartheid. That support has given considerable strength and muscle to our struggle. And the fact that today we are close to the day of liberation is due very largely to the support that we have received here We know that many of you here are people who have demonstrated in front of the South African embassy and who have been arrested for doing so. Some not only once, but a couple of times. We are therefore here among our own brothers and sisters, amongst our comrades in arms. We are at home, but I'll leave the rest to my comrade here, Chris. Thank you.
Mr. President, brothers and sisters, and comrades, I wish to express our greatest appreciation for the warmest welcome that we received from the President, Brother Lane Kirkland. I wish to state this, that since COSATU was formed, it has always plugged itself into as an integral part of the national democratic struggle in our country. I wish also to say that when we started to move around soliciting support for the call for sanctions and disinvestment, the AFL-CIO is one of those national centers of trade unions that played a leading role in that support. It went further and played a role within the ICFTU in getting the ICFTU to support our call for sanctions and disinvestment. And we wish to say here today that that support that we received from them resulted to some extent to the government of South Africa in responding partly positively to the demands that were made by our people, one of which was that we demanded the release of all political prisoners, and that the African National Congress and other political organizations should be unbanned. And it has been as a result of that support that we received from this organization internationally that today we are with our comrades, like the Vice President of the African National Congress, Comrade Nelson Mandela, and others. We want to say to the community of the USA, as well as the trade union, that pressure should be maintained. If at all there are other means that you could use to pressurize the government to speed up the process of negotiations, that would be appreciated by our people. Thank you, Comrade President. Thank you. Is also existing. Yeah. Yes.
Take the time out. Everyone's I don't know, that's what the last time was waiting. People will protest against it, yeah. Very hard to understand. Well, I've not heard of
You see where the load is. That's
You need to take
Right here.
Chris, I thought you were with us as we went round.
No, I thought it might take too long.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Will you introduce All right. I'll call on Willie Baker to introduce your party.
Bill Wynn would shoot me if I didn't do this.
I understand you're going to put iron on that Sunday. We does too. We have a delegation going to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. Come Sunday, you see Mr. Mandela.
I'm going to call on Brother Willie Baker of the Food and Commercial Workers and the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists to introduce the party that is accompanying Nelson Mandela and Mrs. Mandela on their trip.
Thank you, I'm on this side.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
To your left. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce someone. When we were riding to Lusaka the day after Christmas of last year, it never occurred to me that I would be introducing her to introduce Mr. Mandela to the Executive Council and the rest of the executive members here. Let me introduce Linda Way Mabuso, who is the representative of the ANC to the United States, and ask her if she would introduce the delegation that is with Mr. Mandela. Linda Way.
A bold-headed gentleman, two ladies on his side. He's the Treasurer General of the African National Congress, Comrade Thomas Ngobi. To his right is Sister Bernard Ngube. She's also the President of the Transvaal Federation of Women. Protocol lady here, Tikilili Mabizela. Here is another worker from the media, the editor of New Nation, Zwelakhe Sisulu. And I assumed you had met him, but you haven't perhaps. Chris Dlamini is the Vice President of the Congress of South African Trade Unions.
It is a great pleasure to have you with us. Brothers and sisters, the long struggle of the South African people to cast off the yoke of racism and exploitation is accelerating. Apartheid is doomed, and freedom is coming to that part of the world. Once again, the wave of democracy is sweeping aside state power because courageous men and women have risen to their feet and demanded their basic human rights. Today, we are delighted and honored to welcome the great symbol of that struggle, a figure whose unflinching leadership and fortitude and personal sacrifice have moved the world. Nelson Mandela's release from prison and his visit to our shores are a source of great hope and promise for the rapid and peaceful dismantling of apartheid and the establishment of a non-racial society that respects the dignity of every person. In a turbulent nation where the road to nonviolent change is fraught with great peril, Mr. Mandela's role in upcoming negotiations will be crucial and pivotal. Let him be assured of our deep commitment to his struggle and our determination to help him in any way possible. It has been more than 3 decades since the AFL-CIO first denounced apartheid and committed resources to the building of strong and free trade unions on the African continent. Since that time, we have supported the black trade union movement in South Africa because we believe that the building of authentic, effective, and broadly based institutions offer the best prospects for peaceful social change, and that freedom of association is the infrastructure on which all other freedoms stand. We have not sought to impose our wisdom on our brothers and sisters in South Africa or to define their objectives, but only to help them to carry out their own objectives as they themselves define them. And that is why Nelson Mandela and his people can continue to count on our unswerving support for the maintenance of economic sanctions against the government of South Africa until the apartheid system is completely dismantled and democracy, freedom, and justice arrive in that country. Brothers and sisters, it is my great pleasure to give you Nelson Mandela.
In our delegation, there is Mr. Chris Dlamini, the Vice President of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, which is the country's biggest labor organization, labor federation. It is proper that he should use this opportunity for addressing you and briefing you on the labor movement in our country, and also on the extent to which your support over the years has helped to bring about the hope of a democratic transformation in our country in the near future. It will be sufficient for me merely to state that there are significant developments that are taking place in our country today, and those developments make it possible for us to reach a negotiated settlement with the South African government. We are saying this not just as a question of rhetoric. We say this because since 1986, we have been urging the government to sit down and to negotiate with us. The government sought to impose humiliating and even insulting conditions on us before they could sit down and talk to us. We refused to accept those conditions and pointed out that if it is a question of imposing conditions, we have a lot of conditions we could impose upon them, because we could ask them to give reparations for the crimes they have committed over the years against the oppressed people of our country. After 4 years of patient persistence, the government has ultimately agreed, yielded to the pressure which we have exerted on them, both through mass action as well as through persuasion. The peace process that is going on today in the country is the result of the efforts of the ANC and the ANC alone. We have told the government that there is not a single political organization in our country which has a record of total commitment to peace as the African National Congress, and that if we resorted to strategies like violence and pressure, local and international, it is due to the fact that the government has left us with no alternative but to resort to those strategies. We have also made it clear to the government that the methods of political action which the South African people use were determined by the government and the government alone. Where the government had chosen to open channels of communication between itself and the masses of the people, there would never have been any need for us to resort to violence. But where the government has closed all channels of communication, banned our political organizations, banned free political activities, and used force to suppress non-violent and peaceful demonstrations, what alternative did we have? We have therefore resorted to violence because the government has forced us to do so. And we made it clear that if the government wants us to move away from violence, the ball was in their court. And because of our commitment to non-violence, there would be no need for us to continue using violence. We are, however, happy to announce that in the discussions that the ANC had with the government last year, we reached an agreement on the question of violence. That is an agreement between ourselves and the government. We have pointed out that once the government has removed all the obstacles which we have identified, and it is very clear that the government is going to remove all those obstacles. We made it clear that once the government removes all those obstacles, we would consider the question of a cessation of hostilities. And we even formulated together with the government the response that we would give to the press after our meeting. And that formulation was that once the government, we have agreed with the government, that once they remove the obstacles to negotiation, we will consider the whole question of violence. So that the question of violence now is no longer really an issue, because we are now proceeding on the basis of an agreement which we've reached with the government. we are hopeful that the peace process is going to proceed without any hassles, and all that we need is the support from the American people. And from our visit to New York, Boston, and now to Washington, it appears that we are going to receive the support that we require. For the rest, I leave it to my comrade here, Chris Dlamini.
Comrade President, brothers and sisters, I think you are all aware of the fact that the struggle in South Africa is a product of the conditions under which the people live and work. Conditions that are determined by a racist government, whereby the majority of the people who happens to be black are not accorded the right to vote. And therefore, laws that are made are, to some extent, to oppress the majority of our people. Those laws were used to suppress the working people, so that those who own the means of production would have all the rights to exploit the working people. Some of you would be aware that the African National Congress in 1955 adopted a document called Freedom Charter, which says that no government can claim authority unless it is based on the will of the majority of our people. And it has a clause which says there will be jobs and security for all. It is on those bases that COSATU, as a trade union movement, when it was formed, it located itself within the hubs of the national democratic struggle that is taking place in our country, because the call that was made by the African National Congress related to the needs and aspirations of our people. And it is because of that that there is a very strong bond between the African National Congress and COSATU today. It is because of that position that COSATU, as a federation, moved around after it was formed and solicit support from the international trade union movement, which in actual fact resulted in most of the trade union movement in the world supporting that call, which initially was made by the African National Congress. So we are saying those who have decided to support us in our struggle for liberation, which we believe if we are liberated in South Africa, the whole of the Southern Africa region would be free. Because the existence of apartheid in that region is also a threat to the, to the progress of the frontline states and the other states in that region. And we therefore call upon all people of peace to support and to continue to maintain sanctions as it was decided upon by your governments and your trade union movement until such time that apartheid has been removed and a democratic government has been put in place. We would therefore call upon all those who want to put questions to us to do so. Thank you.
I believe we have time for a few questions that Brother Mandela and Brother Dlamini would be prepared to respond to. Lynn Williams,
Well, I
President
would
of the
first
Steelworkers.
like to add a personal tribute and an organizational tribute from my union, the United Steelworkers, to you, sir, and the dramatic and tremendous courage which you've displayed over all these years in pursuing your cause and pursuing the cause of freedom and democracy and against apartheid in your country. I noted with great interest the other day that you addressed the business community and spoke with them to, as I understood the newspaper reports, media reports, spoke with them about a future democratic state in South Africa and the role of business and some private enterprise along with state enterprise and so on. And I commend you for that conversation. I think that can be most helpful in continuing the struggle. I wonder if you and Brother Chris, either or both of you might want to say something about your vision for the role of the labor movement in a free and democratic South Africa. Many of us here believe that a very significant part of the struggle has been the role of the black trade unions in South Africa in bringing economic force to bear in terms of social needs and social and economic justice. I'd be very interested in what you might say about the shape of the new South Africa and the role of the labor movement within that country which we're so anxious to see created.
The African National Congress and COSATU say eye to eye on this question, and I would therefore request Comrade Chris to respond to your question.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the role of the trade union in the near future has been discussed within COSATU itself, and the position that has been arrived at is acceptable to the ANC. That of saying that the trade union would be independent in the future, so that it would be able to address certain problems that relates to the working people. So there is no question of a federation affiliating to a political party, but there would still be that alliance as long as that government is positive in its response to the call made by the workers. If it changes, then there will be problems.
Very good.
Well, we have not, just to add, we have noted the threat.
Vince Zambrano, President of the Letter Carriage. Benny?
Mr. Mandela, the whole world, you're a great man, and the whole world knows what you stand for and how you stood up for what you stand for. There is a saying in our country, behind every great man is a great woman. And your wife, Winnie Mandela, when you were so unjustly incarcerated for those 27 years, was out front representing you. And I think that her role is to be not only commended, but to be recognized. I say this because she asked me to say it.
It's also because he's Italian. Jack Shankman.
Well,
I think you went far enough, man.
I mean, I got in enough trouble already. Well, I think Lane set the stage when he said that we have been supportive of your struggle for more than 3 decades. Independent unions within our federation have found their own ways to support your struggle and the struggle of the black African people. And I might say all Africans, because if your struggle is successful, then all Africans will be benefited by your struggle. They found a number of ways to support you. We divested all of our investments in South Africa, many of these, most of them have. We've helped our colleagues in trade unions, we in the Postal Service, our unions have helped the unions in South Africa. And as Wayne said, while we supported your struggle, we never have tried to impose our ideas on how you should conduct your struggle. Now, having said that, I would ask you, beyond your call for continued and maybe even stronger sanctions, how else can we help you to achieve your just end in this struggle?
That is an important question, because what we seek from the international community, and in particular from the labor movement, is help in skills and expertise. The labor movement in the USA is one of the strongest in the world, and they have immense experience in the very organization of trade unions, the methods of negotiations with the employers on behalf of the workers, and the training of the workers themselves to be able to articulate their views on the factory floor and generally as an organization in the country. You can help tremendously by making this experience, this expertise available to our own trade union movement. COSATU has done exceptionally well. In fact, they have received praise from very unexpected quarters. They have received praise from an organization, from an individual like Professor Vehan of the University of South Africa. He is a man who in the late 70s was appointed by the government to investigate the possibility of the formation of black trade unions. It was mainly his recommendations in that report which induced the government to recognize black trade unions. And when he was asked for his opinion sometime last year as to what he thinks as to the responsibility of black trade unions and what was referred to as the numerous and irresponsible strikes which had taken place since black trade unions were established, he gave an opinion which stunned white South Africa, because he said, taking into account the problems facing black trade unions and their lack of experience, they had behaved responsible throughout these years. He was also asked about the fact that black trade unions make no distinction between economic issues affecting workers and politics. He defended that position and said it is because black trade unions can never get their rights in full until the political question is settled. So he took a very progressive stand and complimented the black trade unions for the stand that they have taken. The other quarter, which was surprising in its positive attitude towards COSATU and the workers, was Dr. van der Merwe, the Director General of the Department of Manpower. He also complimented the black trade unions for the way in which they have conducted themselves. Now, that shows very clearly how positive COSATU has been. And we feel that if COSATU can get the assistance of the American trade unions who are experienced in the fields which I have already identified, they would make an even greater impact than they are making now. I hope that these views are being shared by Comrade Chris.
Maybe to add, Comrade Chair, we would even go further and say that the AFL-CIO as a federation should try to encourage its affiliate to have bilateral relationship with their sister unions in South Africa, so that they are able to share ideas and they are able to put forward their request on whatever they would want it to do in South Africa. I think that also could help if the federation here could encourage their affiliates to do that.
Brother Jack Shankman, Amalgamated Clothing Textile Workers.
Mr. Mandela, Chris, there are many unions in consonance with the policy enunciated by the AFL-CIO that do maintain bilateral relationships with the COSATU unions and have helped them in various struggles, from strikes to incarceration and the like. My question to you, Mr. Mandela, sir, is that you spoke to the business community, and obviously there will come a time when sanctions will end and your country will be free, and you will be looking for investment. We as trade unionists operate within a market economy, but by the same token we're concerned about what kind of social base in which that operates. I'm sure that the business community asked you your views on, based on your views of how the economy would operate before they would invest. And it would be interesting if you could share with us your views on how you see the business community, a business climate, and what kind of social base you see that would be operating under in a new and free South Africa.
The business community inside and outside South Africa was disturbed by the statement which I made from prison, in which I stated that the policy of the ANC was one of state participation in certain sectors of the economy. Here, I was not announcing any new policy. This is the position taken by the African National Congress as far back as 1955, when it published its basic policy document. It declared that the riches, the wealth of the country beneath the soil, the financial institutions, and monopoly industry will belong to the people. Now, I repeated that in my statement. Now, we took that position because when we examined the living conditions of black in South Africa, we found that state participation was inevitable for the purpose of rectifying the inequitable distribution of the wealth of the country. In our country, the entire resources of the country are owned by the white minority. Even as far as the whites are concerned, it is only a tiny minority of whites who own the resources of the country. As I have pointed out in other meetings, one illustration of this inequitable imbalance is the fact that the shares which are quoted in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, no less than 75% of them are owned by one company, one corporate body, the Anglo-American Corporation, Mining Corporation. Now, that is an illustration of the inequitable distribution of the wealth of the country, of the resources of the country. We have no hope whatsoever of redressing this inequitable distribution unless there is state participation in certain sectors of the economy. But for the rest of the economy, that will be based on free enterprise. It will be a free market economy. Now, when we announced in our policy document, when we declare for state participation in specific sectors of the industry, we were not announcing anything new in the economic history of our country. Because up to now, there are certain sectors of the economy which are nationalized. The railways, the airways, the electricity, the health services, all these are up to now nationalized. The steel industry was until recently also nationalized. So in the history of the country, nationalization is something that is well known. We didn't see, therefore, the necessity for the hue and cry that emerged when we restated the policy which we declared as far back as 1955. Now, of course, we didn't go further than merely declare this principle, this policy. But we will be very careful in bringing about the changes in the sectors of the economy which we have identified. Firstly, if it can be shown that there are other options other than state participation, we will go for that. And state participation will not be an option if there are better options than that. We are having discussions with businessmen in our country. We have had numerous meetings. The last one consisted of about 400 businessmen all over the country. And the meeting was addressed by the former chairman of Anglo-American, Mr. Gavin Raleigh, and myself. And then we had a panel discussion in which there were two businessmen, Mr. Gavin Raleigh himself and Mr. Masson, the head of another powerful corporate body in our country. Then there was Mr. Thabo Mbeki and myself. We spent the whole day from about 10 o'clock in the morning until about 8 o'clock in the evening, exchanging views. And the point that we made is that even when we will now be taking a decision for state participation in any particular industry, this will be done with the cooperation of the business people themselves, because it would be futile, if not fatal, for us to force decisions because we consider them to be the correct solution of our economic problems. There would be the most careful negotiations and consultation with the business sector. And that will go, of course, with the people as a whole. We will have to canvass the opinions of the interested groups in this regard. And if we are shown some alternative options, we will go for that. So that the whole question of trying to address the economic inequalities in our country will be the subject of negotiations and consultation amongst all the people of South Africa. All that we want is an economy which is healthy, vibrant, and which can cater for the needs of the people from the point of view of full employment, maximum production, and the generation of a social consciousness on the part of that economy. We are not concerned with models. We are not going to follow any ideology. We are concerned with practical solutions to our problem.
to have to call this to a halt, Owen. You'll have to save your question till Detroit. There are heavy demands on Brother Mandela's time, and he's been extremely generous with us, I think. Before we depart, just as a token of the visit, Brother Mandela, I'd like to present you with a book that we made up, which is a compilation of the positions of the AFL-CIO in support of the struggle against apartheid and for justice, racial and social justice in South Africa, beginning with, I think the first expression was in 1956. So if you would just take that with appreciation.